What is the occult? What does it mean? What has caused this word, which in a literal sense only means hidden from view, to have become synonymous with dark powers, evil, pacts with the devil, and a generic term for magic in all its forms? Perhaps the fact that it signifies that which is concealed from view resonates powerfully with these very subjects, all of which are normally invoked and celebrated far away from the gaze of the ignorant, the uninitiated, and the fearful. Many of these descriptions have been generated through countless years of malicious oppression, suppression, and ignorance generated by those with a vested interest. They decided that the values embodied in ritual magic and thaumaturgy, symbolizing freedom for the individual, were not in the best interest of the state, and in times long past, this meant the Christian, particularly the Roman Catholic Church. This is indeed bizarre because, as we shall see, the roots of religious belief of all shades and hues are embedded in, and indeed sprang from, magic and magical practices and beliefs. If magic is the rootstock of religion, what then was the stock from which recognized magic developed? As we shall see, and as with most things, the answer lies in the natural world. To be certain, there is a universe of difference between the illusion smoke and mirrors used by stage illusionists and the bizarre talents wielded by those who choose to take a mystical and esoteric path. Stage illusionists are not in any sense magicians, although they regard their tricks as magic. Therefore, as with mages of old, any reference to genuine thaumaturgy is deemed magic, M-A-G-I-C-K.
Well, I would say that the occult is something that is considered to be occluded, which means it's hidden from view. Much like when we have a solar eclipse and the Earth's shadow falls across the sun, and we see the Earth's shadow on the sun, and so we see something that looks fantastic and amazing, would have looked fantastic and amazing to our ancestors, who would have seen it, and it would have been probably something quite miraculous. To most people, when you mention the occult, they seem to think of ritual magic, secret societies, and those that have practices that are not part of the mainstream, that are not made available to the everyday, and are not available in the light of day, if you like, sort of under cover of darkness.
Magic, alchemy, shamanism, manipulation, they're all related, and they're all used by powers, and have been for an awful long time. Whether those powers are political, military, companies, religions, it doesn't matter. It's all part of manipulation. It's all part of keeping something slightly out of view of you, but in also to convince you that they know more than we do. The great magicians of the past were people who would convince us that they knew more, that they had a special power. And it's no different to politicians and business leaders, that they know more than us, that they understand better than we do. And therefore we should trust in them and follow them and be guided by them. That's modern day magic. Today we are bombarded with one thing after another on the TV screens, in the internet, in books, magazines, in strange little things that we hold in our hands that are full of apps, God knows what else. And yet we're in an age where there are more people with disposable income than ever before. If we went back 100 years with the income that we've got today, we would be rich. But today, we still don't feel rich. Why? Because with all that disposable income, we have to go and buy this product, that holiday. We must have this car, we must go there, we must do all these things because we're told we must. And we blindly follow, we don't question it. And that's magic. They are magically using sleight of hand and word and tricking us into getting onto a hamster's wheel and doing what the magician commands. And it is no different today than it has been forever. The moment man woke up, realised he could think, realised his mind was not much different to other people's, he realised he could manipulate. And that's the dark side of the occult, if you like, more expressly seen in things like voodoo, where it's caricatured, where we see somebody stab a doll or whatever, and that's kind of a caricature of what's really going off inside the mind. It's a control of your mind. That doll is just simply a material item. It has no connection to you whatsoever, but mentally and spiritually, for whatever that word means, it does. We've connected to it, and therefore we can be manipulated through that item. And it's no different to all the items that we surround ourselves with today. We are manipulated through those items. We're given this PC, these wonderful PCs in the corner of the room, and we sit there for hours and hours and hours every single day, wasting our lives messing about with stupid computer programs. And where is it really getting us? Is it making us a better person? Is it helping us improve our society? Are the starving masses now being fed? Are whales still being taken out of the seas? Are the rainforests still being destroyed, etc., etc.? We could go on and on and on. Are we really improving things with all these wonderful tools and technologies? There is a light side to that, of course, because a great many people do wake up and do realise and do use these tools for good. In its reverse, it's a magical battle. But for such an awful long time now, the magicians of politics and business and religion have been manipulating us, that they are seriously in charge of the masses. And that is a cult. It's unseen. People don't even realise it.
The Animists. What must our ancestors have made of the sun and the moon, the vast panoply of sparkling stars that arced across the night sky? And what of the quick, brief streaks of light as meteors burned up in the atmosphere overhead? Could these be gods? And the fierce stabs of lightning darting and dancing in the dark, roiling clouds as thunderstorms bellowed and blustered overhead, what were they? And what of the earthquakes that sundered the planet? It can only be presumed, in the beginning at least, that ancient man was often terrified by the world outside, huddling together for protection, quite defenseless against the powers of nature. Was it events like these that awoke a sense of wonder, sparking man's desire to actually make sense of what he saw? Did these wonders become our gods? From the earliest times, as the human race learned to cope with the harsh requirements of survival, they came to understand that the best way of doing so was to live in harmony with their surroundings. Because of this, and in spite of their lack of education as it is now understood, they reasoned with remarkable ability that they had to appease, understand, and communicate with the planet as a whole, in harmony with all living things, be it animal, vegetable, or mineral. This in many ways contradicts how anthropologists originally regarded ancient peoples. At one point they were seen as having no more sense of self-awareness than, say, a bird or a deer. In other words, they only lived in the here and now with no concept of cause or effect, or past or present. Perhaps this might have been true of proto-humans, But as the evolutionary process proceeded, it changed. Our early ancestors instinctively saw no difference between the sentient and non-sentient, the living or the dead. If human beings were creatures of spirits, then so were animals, plants, trees, even stones and rocks. It was the only way they could make sense of the world they lived in, and it was entirely instinctive. This outlook was the rationale behind the custom of erecting totem poles and other fetish objects into a community in which benevolent spirits were invited to make their home and through their presence bring security and happiness to the clan. This property was also associated with other ritual objects, so much so that the loss of these important artifacts could literally destroy cohesion and confidence within that community. The end result of this paradigm, slowly evolving over millennia, was the birth of animism, a practice accepting without question that each and every object, animate and otherwise, has an individual spirit. This system of belief was sufficiently successful to ensure its survival, and indeed a form of it still exists in various parts of the world today, in Siberia, South America, among other remote areas. Interestingly enough, none of the rituals, none of the beliefs were seen in any way improper or wrong. On the contrary, they were the simple tools of survival, and as such they were in no way hidden or occulted. This only happened after the emergence of the shamans, for which we will touch on in short order. As animism took hold, it became commonplace for any given member of a tribe or other social group to ask the blessing or permission from the life or spirit inherent in, for example, a tree. Since they regarded the tree in its entirety sacred, they ensured that every scrap was used, leaves, branches, bark, roots, and trunk. The situation was identical with animals and fish, where every last part of a carcass was used, entrails, flesh, blood, skin, and bones. Nothing was wasted, as this showed a fundamental lack of respect, inviting the wrath of a dead animal's spirit. This simple but effective belief system served them well, but slowly evolved until through experience it became necessary to recognize that prior to setting out on a hunt or fishing expedition, something must be done, some spirit invoked, to ensure success and a bounty of meat to feed the clan. A similar situation developed around early forms of agriculture. Through this process, it slowly became evident that some individuals had more good fortune and success than others when they led the hunt, or the harvested yield was better when they performed the ritual invocation. The birth pains of the shaman had begun.
Well, the animists, a group of people were, or probably still are, there's probably animists still out there who believe in everything has a spirit. The camera has a spirit, I have a spirit, the floor has a spirit. Going on a much more natural scale, trees have spirits, stones have spirit, rivers, seas, everything, every animal, every living thing has a spirit. Even things that seemingly not alive have a spirit about them, have an energy about them.
The emergence within any group of anyone who through instinct or observation learned to in some way predict or control any disaster or calamity that happened to befall their group became elevated to an extremely important position. This was because his or her talent might literally be the difference between life and death. It is also the dawn of the magician. The position of such a person within the group cannot be understated. Next to the hetman or clan chief, they were the de facto leader, and as such were awarded considerable respect. They also adopted the mantle of a healer, which added yet another layer of importance, and with this came an aura of genuine fear. Since they could control the elements and by inference the spirits themselves, they were not to be insulted or demeaned. So in many ways they wielded considerable power, and it was as well not to offend them. The shaman's function as a healer might involve terrifying theatrical invocations of any number of spirit entities thought adequate to heal an individual. But since this process also normally involved the use of specific herbs and plants, the predecessors of traditional medicine today, these would have also had a considerable effect. Shamans could also be consulted, sometimes for a fee, on any and every subject that might affect individuals within the clan. Other, much more important decisions might affect the internal politics of the group, and it is how they obtain this advice that opens the doors to real magic. It is now recognized that there are substances that can and do alter how we perceive reality. In fact, it is thought that they open doorways to other worlds and the beings who reside there. Among some of the plants used are peyote, mescaline, blue lotus, cannabis, magic mushrooms, ergot, and a considerable number of other natural narcotics and hallucinogens. In fact, some of them were, and indeed still are, used effectively as medicines. Curiously enough, this is also true of the humble weeping willow, which is why trees have long been associated with healing. It is now known that willow bark contains a natural substance, salicin, which is the active ingredient in the painkiller aspirin. Even today, ethnobotany still researches the traditional use of various plants for possible applications as medicines. These traditional uses may have been discovered by accident and deliberately exploited, but this may not necessarily have been the case with another hallucinogen known as DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, sometimes quite accurately referred to as the elf hallucinogen. In its natural state, it is required to swallow 2 different natural extracts. One, an MOA, monoamine oxidase inhibitor, that stops the neutralizing action of this stomach enzyme, and the other active substance, ayahuasca, extracted from a vine. If the inhibitor is not consumed, then the stomach enzyme breaks down the hallucinogen and stops it from working. What is not clear is how these individual properties became known, nor when to take them, and in which order. Was this in itself the result of some sort of magic? Were the instructions deliberately given to voyagers under the effects of some other slightly less effective hallucinogen? This is possible since, given the sheer number of flora and fauna in the rainforest, what kind of accident would have been required to achieve this knowledge? Evolution, information transfer, or something else? The effects of this substance are truly awe-inducing. The visions it produces are those of an entirely different world, one that is inhabited by elves, and perhaps more importantly, serpents. The serpent is a traditional source of wisdom in many cultures, especially in Central and South America. Crucially, these images of elves and serpents are common to everyone who consumes this potion. It can be defined as a universal constant of the ayahuasca experience. Does this mean that these are valid impressions of an alternate reality, or simply the fact that we are all hardwired in a similar fashion, and if the correct buttons are pushed, the same outcome is achieved? Are these images the powerful archetypes suggested by pioneering psychiatrists such as Carl Jung, or do they exist independently? The one unifying factor is the omnipresent serpent. The serpent also has faint resonance with the sinuous structure of the DNA molecule. Could these shamans in some way be literally talking to their own DNA? What might that signify? Could it mean that the DNA molecule is another path to the other world, Or does it signify that the molecule acts like an antenna, collecting and transmitting signals from the invisible entities that coexist with us? Signals too subtle for our most advanced electronic equipment to detect? Or, as with many examples of progress, are our own senses infinitely superior to anything man-made? From these early underpinnings, it gradually became clear that there was a defining force behind the work and rituals of the shamans the world over. For this latent power was used and tapped into by all civilizations from the earliest times. The Egyptians, the Romans, and the Greeks, among others, all utilized it. It was embraced by the Finns and the Lapps right out to the Russian plains and beyond. The Arab culture also embraced shamanism. It was a ubiquitous force that steadily spread and developed in a variety of ways, some conventional and some not. It was the inspiration behind the alchemists, who were also the forefathers of chemistry and metallurgy. And it also emerged as the prototype for the magician.
Shamanism is as old as man. It's got its roots in trying to find more than that which we are, in trying to extend who we are, and trying to get into those other imaginary worlds that we create, such as heaven and hell. And there have been a great many names for these other worlds. The shaman was the man who could go into that other world and bring back such things as healing and knowledge and wisdom for the tribe. He would use various techniques in order to do this, and they would involve meditations, prayer, drugs, fasting, going off in caves and being alone, such as the great stories of people like Muhammad, who went off into a cave and was contacted by Jibril or Gabriel and brought back knowledge of God. Same thing happened to Jesus, who went into the wilderness, and various other people, all of which are taking elements of stories of shamanism from the past. Our roots, our religious roots, are built into shamanism, without all doubt. But whether there's any truth in what the shaman does, whether what that truth is another question. Are they in fact contacting gods, spirits, etc. of the other world? Or are they in fact just simply contacting something that's archetypal, as Carl Jung would say, something that's within us all, something that if we all took these drugs, or we all were in that trained position that the shaman arrives in, that we'd all find, because it's part of us. Is it pure imagination? Are we just simply giving rise to great religions from within the mind of the imaginative human? These questions aren't necessarily easy to scientifically prove one way or the other.
Shamanic traditions are still recognised in the world, as well as in places such as Siberia. We have Native American shamans. Certainly in parts of Southern America there are still shamans who form part of the ayahuasca tradition, who imbibe the ayahuasca plant and use it to commune with other worlds. Shamans are sometimes seen as the interceder between this world and the other worlds. They are the ones that who can go within or travel to those different worlds and commune with those spirits of whatever, whether it's the plants, the trees, whatever, and gain knowledge from everything through their journeys. It could be said that they used a lot of trial and error, where just through generations of people trying different things and in different quantities, they would have had an inkling of what was the right thing. I personally think it was probably something a bit more different than that, whereby if they took certain substances, or even if they didn't, if they had the ability to travel on those inner planes inside the mind and quiet the mind down, perhaps they were in a position to be able to commune with those plants and those entities, whereby they could find out from the plant spirit, what that plant did.
The magicians emerge. Before the selfishness of monotheism appeared, it was entirely in order for the proto-magical and pantheistic to coexist, and in many cases, one was seen as a natural extension of the other. This was entirely appropriate, since pantheism was a direct progression from animism. However, once belief in one single creator God gained sway, there was no room left for nature worship and other forms of non-approved beliefs. The reasons were not hard to see, because any deviation from orthodoxy undermined the values and dogma of rigid belief. It also challenged the authority of the church, so the focus devolved to power and who wielded it. The result was obvious: believe what we tell you or die, which is exactly what happened. Sadly, even now, under one strain of monotheism, it still does. These vigorously enforced policies resulted in the shamans and their descendants, the magicians, being driven underground, in effect the occult, finally and literally becoming occulted or hidden from view. To ensure that magical practices were utterly shunned, the church began a sustained propaganda campaign designed to put in place a belief that the old ways were a certain road to damnation, a policy enforced by torture and death at the stake. It speaks volumes that the old ways refused to go away, yet continued to exist. As with anything that can be used and improved upon, so shamanism developed until its potential was recognized by some individuals who realized that instead of a form of casual nature worship, it could be used to influence the world around them. This did not mean that being a magician was necessarily a full-time job, although in some cases it was. But in the main, it was confined to a small, discreet group who practice on their own and in secret. This situation existed for centuries, and should a magician of either sex be discovered, they faced unbiased judicial process and in many cases were murdered by the state. The history of Middle Ages is littered with instances such as the Inquisition, where waves of hysteria instigated by the authorities was used to justify the various frenzied witch hunts of the time. In this case, the magicians were styled as witches, and on the whole were nothing more than healers and midwives whose sole crime was to alleviate the pain of childbirth. This truly bizarre and skewed piece of history was based on the scriptural injunction that women should suffer childbirth, since this was the burden of Eve, and any attempt to reduce this pain was a major sin. It is a prime example of the deep misogyny that is still endemic within the Roman Catholic Church. Strangely enough, the Catholic Church has had a deep interest in magic of all incarnations, to the point where Pope Honorius collated and wrote the Grimoire of Pope Honorius the Great. This work, which is a French grimoire attributed to Pope Honorius III, who died in 1297, has long been regarded as the most evil work on magic ever produced. Its spells and incantations, many of which involve human sacrifice and ritual sex magic, even outdo those found in other grimoires such as the Key of Solomon, the 6th and 7th books of Moses, and the Book of Cyprian, and invoke such entities as Lucifer and Astaroth, both regarded as the ultimate in evil in the Judeo-Christian tradition. This is typical of the blatant hypocrisy displayed by religions of all sorts to suit their own needs and ends. It is the same hypocrisy that allowed a series of popes to launch wars against those who would not toe their dogmatic line. It is no wonder then that one of the best known manuals used to identify and cure witches, mainly women, the Malleus Maleficorum, was written by two rabid Dominican misogynists, Jacob Sprenger and Heinrich Kramer, one the dean of Cologne University and the other the prior of a monastery. This odious work has been described as the most sinister work on demonology ever written. It was translated through various editions into 4 languages, including English. In fact, it was one of the most important weapons in the armory of the Inquisition. Another work used to persecute witches and magicians was the infamous Demonology, penned by King James I. For all his inquisitional fervor, King James eventually overcame his instinctive and ingrained superstition and came to realize that the vast majority of so-called witches were nothing of the kind. However, in spite of the continual oppression, hate, and fear, the belief in magic would not die. There is a significant difference between witches and magicians. Witches usually had the talent of precognition or second sight, and a few other abilities including medical skills. But magicians were a breed apart, who used what might be referred to as a type of technology to bring about certain ends. It is well to reflect that the Catholic Church and many Protestant fundamentalist churches still consider evil to be a real force and a malignant cancer on the soul of humanity. For this reason, they still continue to fight against it, using exorcism to drive out Satan and his demons. The Catholics use the ritual Romanum, and the fundamentalists a form of charismatic healing. Both, in spite of predictable and furious denials, are also forms of magic.
Well, I mean, we get into a very interesting position where shamans obviously get recompense from their clientele for the work that they do. Certainly, during the medieval period, we have, we knew that, apparently witches existed, for example, in this country, of people who would have been able to cast something to bring about a good crop, or, try and make the land fertile. Whether those people could actually do that or not is another matter. What they may have been able to do was predict the weather, been able to sort of know, because they were so in tune with the cycle of the planet and what season follows what season. Most people, even today, are so absolutely ingrained in the day-to-day running of their own lives that they don't consider what's beyond that, and how the planet works, and how we get from a state of summer to winter. There is a definite path that the sun follows. That the animists and the shamans of old would have noticed these celestial events occurring. They would have known that the sun moved along the horizon, which is why we have certain objects in the land that were created in order to note that movement, to mark that movement, that progression of time. With regards magicians, there was perhaps a leap forward with regard, certainly during the 16th century, after the dissolution of the monasteries, where knowledge was becoming more available to, I wouldn't say lay people, but certainly educated people. The church, once upon a time, was the only place you could get educated. After the dissolution of the monasteries, we have a period of time where people began to study at universities. We have John Dee, who went to university. He was probably one of the first people who went through, what we know of as a university as it is today. Very, very well educated man. Somebody who is considered by many to be a magician. And certainly what we call magic now, they might call it science and mathematics. Their knowledge of mathematics was gaining some power and some speed, because they were finding out information that had only been held within the church for so long, and now they were having access to that information themselves. We know that John Dee, for example, worked with a medium called Edward Kelly. Quite what the relationship and what they did is up for some debate. There are some sources that suggest that John Dee was in fact a spy for Queen Elizabeth, and some even suggest that William Shakespeare was actually a secretary to somebody quite high up in Queen Elizabeth's court, who actually travelled and made note of everything that was going on in the various courts across Europe, which is why when Shakespeare came back to England he was able to write these fantastic plays. I know it's kind of going off the point of it, but there we have this kind of crucible of information that is being passed around to people who don't have access to our modern magic, such as the internet and the technology that we have now. That information would have seemed amazing. Somebody who apparently wasn't out of the country, who actually was out of the country, would come back and say, well, I know what the King of Denmark's up to. Well, how do you know? You know, you've been in court all the time. You've been in a Tudor mansion somewhere. How do you know? Well, because I know these things, because I have access to the inner realms and secret societies and so on.
Magic is a fascinating thing, and it's fascinated man for an awful long time. You can go back to stories of Egypt, and you can see them in the Bible, where there's the battle between the great magician and Moses with the staff that falls to the floor and turns into a snake, or a serpent. The serpent, of course, being a symbol of wisdom and energy and many various other things, and it's a symbol of so many things. And it's always been something that's attached itself to magic, shamanism, alchemy, and I believe that the snake is something that is a thread that runs through all of these ancient mysteries. But magic itself is something still practiced today by a great many people. There are still people around the world who have their great magic rituals, and believe that they're contacting gods and goddesses and great deities from times gone by, and they will pray to the great gods of Babylon or wherever else. What are they really doing? You know, there are people like, for instance, the great Aleister Crowley that everybody talks about, or Dr. John Dee, Rasputin, Cagliostro, Christian Rosenkreutz, whether he was real or not. All of these are really magicians because they're all capable of manipulating. And I believe that the great deal of the magic that we are told about is actually the ability to manipulate human beings. It's not necessarily the ability to actually contact the deities. It's actually the ability to make you believe that they are contacting the deities. It's a kind of form of mentalism. It's a form of just pure manipulation, and it's something that today our great magicians do on a much, much larger scale. And those magicians today are called marketing men, and they work for today's patrons, just like the magicians of the past worked for patrons. And today's patrons are politicians, companies, and they will pay these people in order to create magic for us before our eyes and to convince us that we need this product, this service, we need to vote for that person. Just like the magicians in the past would convince us that we need to offer up some money to them because they were the ones in touch with God, or the gods, or the deities. No different at all to the bishops, the archbishops, the cardinals, whatever you want to call them. They're all manipulators. Is there truth in the magic? I doubt it personally, and yet again it's another one of those things that is incredibly difficult scientifically to prove one way or the other, when you have people who can create such wonderful trickery as to make the Empire State Building disappear, or even convince you to buy some really nasty, horrible food that's packaged in a lovely red and blue or yellow packaging. It's no different. It's all trickery, it's all sleight of hand, and it's all understanding the human mind. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, I mean, monotheism was obviously something that was going along prior to, obviously, the 16th century. We have a lot of quite a few monotheistic faiths, those who believe in a one God, and the Son of God, and so on and so on. There are others that obviously follow prophets, and in fact all of them have prophets in them, and they follow what are known as the religions of the book, where they follow a standard text. Unfortunately, those texts have been misinterpreted and have changed somewhat over the course of time, regardless of what is said, and that, you know, apparently things like the Torah are written down verbatim, they are copied from original texts, etc., etc. But there has to, just by human nature, there has to have been changes to those things. There have to be groups out there whose word of God or book of God is better than somebody else's. So consequently, they cause revolution and in fighting amongst their own people to gain supremacy. It could be a tribal thing, where there's a tribal group who have a particular score to settle, who want to become better than everybody else, so they say their book is better than someone else's. In a lot of respects, yes, you could say that there is one God, one whole God, whereby every element, if you come from an animistic perspective, everything has a spirit, has an individual spirit. Surely each of those individual spirits becomes part of a greater whole when it works together as a synchronous system. The Gaia hypothesis, certainly, that James Lovelock came up with, certainly goes down those lines, where we have this idea of the Earth, our planet, having a consciousness. Every action that we have, every action that we do, things that we make, the things that we create, everything that we put out into the world, the world is throwing back at us as well. This idea that if we are polluting the planet will kick back. If we rape the Earth's resources, she will kick back. She will say, I'm not putting up with this. And this whole idea of the planet itself has a balance that it must maintain. That balance is such a delicate thread that any time it can get broken. And that once that thread is broken, there is no balance anymore. The world comes out of balance, and we have this chaos. But the idea with the Gaia hypothesis is that the planet is self-righting. Whatever happens, whatever we do to it, it will put itself right. Certainly monotheism has a lot to answer for with regards major events happening. There are certain groups who have a belief that the capitalist Western world that we're a part of is considered evil and, corrupt. And they could well be right. There is a lot to be said for a simpler way of living, and I think some of these groups would like to have a simpler way of life. They're not interested in larger conglomerates taking over the world and forcing everybody to buy particular products. Although we say we're not, they would suggest that perhaps they're not forcing us to buy their products. We're still marketed at, and we will still buy those products because we feel we should have them in our lives. So I can kind of understand that there is an element of people who do want to try and change things for the betterment of themselves and their group, and to try and bring down that Western commercial horrible system that we have set up. So I can understand why they would feel compelled to change it. Whether it's for the better or not remains to be seen.
One of the forefathers of modern magicians was Dr. John Dee, who lived in the same era as Paracelsus, Cornelius Agrippa, and Nostradamus. His exploits took him around Europe. He was also a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I. This was fortunate because his experiments with alchemy, a word which along with alcohol has Arabic roots, verged on magical processes and might easily have led to his persecution and probable murder. Among his achievements were his alleged glimpses of Enochian angels, seen by means of a scrying crystal used by his assistant Edward Kelly, and his creation of the Enochian language, a strange script learned from these angels that still appears in certain magic rituals today. There is also speculation that this language was in fact a code he devised as part of his spying role for the court of Queen Elizabeth. Much of what Dr. Dee accomplished was, as with the pioneering work of Copernicus and Galileo, carried out in spite of the restrictions created by church dogma and its cynical manipulation of the general population. Religion requires instinctive, unswaying, and for the most part, unthinking faith to work, which is exactly the same with occult and magical practices. And as we shall see, this unthinking and absolute belief that something is absolutely correct is bizarrely, precisely what we find in the 21st century science, and is something we will return to in due course.
With the song Alchemy, what it's trying to represent and what it's trying to suggest is the idea of opposites, and with opposites there is ultimately a union of those opposites, and from that union comes something from that, something greater or some better potential if you like from it. The song speaks about the sun and the moon. We know that in the daytime we have the sun is high in the sky, it lights up everything, everything's light and bright, and at night time the moon comes out, reflecting the light of the sun back to us in the darkness of night. It's very similar to the Taoist belief system, where if you are familiar with the symbol of the yin-yang, we have a black half and a white half, and with each of those joined together create a whole. But within each of those opposite is an element of that other opposite. So everything is related, everything. The land is related to the sky, and they meet and they have elements that are the same. The floor, the ceiling, the walls, everything that we're in is related. Everything in our society is related. Every one of us is related in some way, whether it's through genetics or because we belong to the same species. Everything on the planet is related and is interrelated.
The truth about alchemy is multi-leveled, really. There is truth to the concept that they were actually trying to turn base metals such as lead into gold and thereby be rich, especially for their patrons, many of which paid them to do this under the belief that it was possible. But there are other levels to alchemy, and one of which the great psychoanalyst Carl Jung picked up on, that alchemy was actually a work upon the self, that we were the base metal, that we needed to reduce ourselves back down to the base metal in order to thereby turn ourselves into gold, thereby to become enlightened individuals. And so for a great many people, alchemy is the work to improve who we are, to become something much better, much bigger than the ordinary human being with all his frailties and problems and psychological issues. It's not something dark, as for an awful long time the Christian church tried to make it. It's not some dark magic, it's not something that these wizards and these terrible people did in the back rooms and these terrible laboratories which were, put across as being an awful hellhole. It's actually something much better than that, and a lot of the great thinkers of the past were drawn to alchemy in that respect. It's actually been part of a great many movies, books, stories throughout time, often hidden, because the Catholic Church, for instance, for an awful long time also, were rulers in the West, if you like, and you wouldn't dare say anything against them. So they came down on alchemy quite hard, and thereby made it an occult thing in the modern term of occult. They made it a terrible, dark ritual, terrible, nasty, hellish thing. And it's actually not. It's really its roots are in a thing called gnosis, something that you can find 2,000 plus years ago. You can even find it as far back as Egypt, where gnosis is the knowledge of all. It's an experience that we have in order to discover ourselves and to discover our place in the universe. And it's not necessarily something that comes through reading books. It's not necessarily something that comes from being at church or in the lecture theatre. It's something that very often comes from not actually learning anything at all, just by being open, just by letting the waves inside of the head free. At least that's the concept. Unfortunately, some dark elements have come through this because a lot of people tried using drugs in order to free their minds, and I suppose you could say that therein lies the route to finger pointing and saying you're a bad guy, you shouldn't be doing these kind of things, and it releases all kinds of terrible things from people. Because if you actually do those drugs, or you actually try to free your mind in that way, if you're not prepared, and if you're not balanced, if you're not aware of emotion and logic, the balance between the two things, and if you're all emotional, then the drugs will simply release a demon from within you, and therein lies some of the dark side of the occult.